Tov. You should have a lot of nachas.
Thank you. Dov Yonatan,
Oh, wow.
named after Ben Lax, and his first English name is Ben.
Very nice.
You know what's the initial die? How many children they have?
No, they have 3.
No, so it's not die. After 5, you can start saying die.
We're going to see in a minute. Okay, so we learned we're on page 31, Dinei Tziruf Leminion, and we learned the heter of Rav Moshe, Nigris Moshe. He allows a cotton to hold a chumash when b'shas Chag. But the view was rejected by Rav Ovadia Yosef, whose opposition is so strong that he writes a person may not remain in a minyan whose quorum relies upon a minor. Maskona dedina, shebikvarm v'yeshuvim ktanim shein sham asar gdolim. In little villages where there were not 10 adults, umuchrachim l'tzaref kotan lasara, and they needed to include a kotan afal pichein in la'atir b'zeh. Laso is ma'isa neged das moron, shekibalnu hayrasav. The Shulchan Aruch never permitted a minor. So for the Sfardim, he's posketing that you can't be matir. You can't be mitzvah if a cotton for reading the Torah. Person who is of the right heart and mind should leave and go somewhere else. Hashem's honor is not going to rest on such a kehillah. This chumrah is held by Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. Ein letzaref kotan leminyan klal. Afim al yedei bitul leminyan b'pam hazeh yizbatel leminyan b'pam machedos. Cannot do it no matter what. Dvar halacha kagon shatzibur maskim bekoishi l'sasef l'tfila b'tzibur. The tzibur said we're going to gather, and if you don't gather them, they won't come again. He calls that a shasat chag, so you can't use it. While most authorities seem to be opposed to incorporating a minor in the count of the minyan, Rav Shmuel Vosner, the Shevet HaLevi, was more lenient. The there are many gedolim that were not happy with giving a child a chumash, but ve'im nagu nagu. But if the minig is there, there's a minig. That's only Kadishu Baruch, says Rav Vosner, but not by Kriyas HaTorah. Among American poskim, Rav Gedaliah Schwartz rules that in cases where the community will not otherwise have a minyan, one may rely on the lenient opinions. Shari Gedula. Ramah even adds that the cotton should not be counted even while loading a chumash, unless it's a shasat chag, a difficult situation. However, in practice, many other poskim rejected the ruling of counting the minor under any circumstance. Many American rabbis in various communities were faced with the problem of bringing together a minyan, and some felt the need to rely on the lenient opinion. However, it has been pointed out that this leniency should only be used where the community does not have 10 qualified males at all. If there's an adequate number available, but it's just that they neglect to come to a minyan, the minors should not be counted, since the members of the community are obligated to participate with full cooperation.
Good luck in many minyanim in this town.
What is the age of the cotton?
Oh, Susie, can you, there's another volume 10. Yeah, give him that. And you, so the other, on the landing, on the stairs.
Some people are saying it should be 11 and a half, the cotton.
We didn't see that last. We said as long as the cotton knows to who he's davening, then he can be mitzaref.
I remember something 11 and a half, and he has to hold the Sefer Torah.
No, we said last week the leniency is giving him a chumash.
Chumash, okay.
Chumash, he has to have a chumash. Now, page 34. When does a minor reach maturity with respect to constituting a minyan? What event allows for the transition from minority to majority according to halacha? According to the Rishonim, this transition is triggered by physical maturation as evidenced by the emergence of 2 pubic hairs. The source of this is the Mishnah in Nida. Tinoket Shavir Shtei Cyrus, a young girl that has 2 hairs. And let's say she was married to Reuven, and Reuven and Shimon are brothers. And Reuven dies without children. And the girl falls to Shimon, the Yibum. So Yibum and Chlitz are only done if the child is a Bogeres, if the child is not a Katan. So what defines her being a Gedola? If she has 2 hairs, then Ocholtzos Omis Yabmos, you could give her Chlitz or Yibum. V'chayeves b'chol mitzvahs amos b'Torah. And she's chayiv in all mitzvahs. L'chein tinok, a boy, shevi stay Cyrus, chayiv b'chol mitzvahs amos b'Torah. The royally has been Sor Moira. Mishiyavi stay Cyrus at Shiyakev Zokim. There is a din of Ben Sor Moira that a rebellious son, the Gemara says, lo hayv lo niv, it never happened. But according to halacha, he has to have 2 Cyrus until he has a lot of hair covering that area. It's that short window of time. They call it a zaken, a beard. So in light of this statement, the growth of 2 hairs designates the transition from minority to majority with respect to all the mitzvahs of the Torah. Similarly, the Gemara in Sanhedrin 68b notes that just as obligations begin only upon reaching majority, so too liability and punishments for sin begin only upon reaching majority. Chazal do note in a number of places that the age of 13 years bears halachic significance. Nonetheless, the only source that explicitly describes this age as a transitional to majority seems to be the statement in Pirkei Avos. At 13, he is subject to mitzvahs. The Rosh writes in a tshuva that the true basis for the age of mitzvahs is actually a halacha l'Moshe Sinai, a halacha delivered to Moshe with no basis in the Torah. Says the Rosh, "May ayin lanu ben Yud Gimel Shana v'Yom Echad baroin shin." Where is the source that a boy 13 years and 1 day is liable to punishment? Aval pachos mikein lo, but less than that, no. Da. Ki halach l'Moshe Sinai hu. V'hu bichlal shi'urin chatzitzin u'mechitzin shein halach l'Moshe Sinai. This is part of the measurements and chatzitza and dine mechitza that were given to Moshe Rabbeinu. The shir uktzav l'chol davar nitin l'Moshe Baal Peh. So from these sources, it emerges that there are 2 necessary conditions in order for a minor to reach majority, according to halacha. The first condition is age, which is learned from halach l'Moshe Sinai. The second condition is the growth of 2 hairs, which is evidence that the person has begun the transition to physical maturity. Unlike the apparent impression from the Mishnah in Avos, the age of 13 alone does not determine halachic status. But this age does constitute a milestone which confirms physical maturation as halachically meaningful. Meaning, if a 12-and-a-half boy had 2 Cyrus, he would not be considered a gadol. You have to be 13 of years and have 2 Cyrus. Then you're a gadol. Similarly, the Gemara in Kiddushin indicates that physical indications of maturation are also insufficient before the child reaches an age of maturation. Right? The Tanya ben Tesha Shonim Sheviste Cyrus. If you see a 10-year-old boy above 9, that has 2 hairs, shuma, it's a mole. it's like a dermatological abnormality. You can't rely on it. It's going to fall off. The Oden Bo still Shuma. If you see a hair from the age of 9 up until 12 and one day, it's still considered like a dermatological problem. Rabbi Yosef ben Emmer Simon, although he disagrees. Ben Yud Gimel Shana v'Yom Divrei Akol Simon. Everybody holds that if you have the hairs and you're 13 years old, then you're a gadol. The Shulchan Aruch rules, in accordance with the anonymous opinion of the Baraisa, that the child must be 13 for the hairs to be considered a valid sign of puberty. You need both, 2 hairs plus 13. The Mishnah Berurah explains that despite the language of 13 years in one day, a child is considered 13 and a bar mitzvah at the very beginning of that one day, the day of his Hebrew birthday, even if he was born in the middle of the day. Right? We don't calculate it. Let's say if he was born at noontime, that, he's not going to be bar mitzvah until noontime. He's already bar mitzvah the night before when the day switches. Lav dafka yoim elakivan shenichtas tchilas hayom mishnas yudal b'filu shachas afilu regach sagi. Once he begins his 14th year, it's enough. He was born the last 5 minutes of Rosh Hashanah. Once Rosh Hashanah comes in, Nasa ben Yud Gimel Shana, B'chilas Leil Rosh Hashanah Shel Shnas Yudalid. Now, if he was born, right, Ben Hashmoshos defines the time between Shkia and Seisa Krechavim, when it's a suffix, whether it's day or night. So, anything midoraisa like Yibum, Birchas Kohanim, for example, would be lechumra, we would wait till the next day. According to what we saw in Masechet Kiddushin, physical signs are not meaningful when they appear before the age of maturation. The Gemara needed discusses another consideration regarding the intersection of these two factors. May we assume that physical maturation has begun by the time that the minor reaches the age of majority, regardless of the presence of the sign of 2 hairs? Do we rely on chazaka? Do we have to check the kid? We're going to count him for a minyan. We look at his birth certificate and we know that he's 13. Okay. Do we say that it's a chazaka that all 13 boys have hair? Through chazaka, through convention. And therefore we don't have to rely on checking. So, once a ketana is 12 years old, there's a presumption that she has the simoni. According to Rava, there is a halachic presumption in chazaka that she has developed signs. Therefore, we may take it for granted under normal circumstances that reaching the designated age is accompanied by physical maturation. However, the Gemara explains that this assumption is not universally applied. The Gemara rules that it is fair to assume that a girl who has reached 12 years has also begun to mature insofar as preventing her from performing miyun after she has reached the age of 12 and presumably begun to mature. But the Gemara dismisses any assumption in the case of chalitza, wherein she is excused from the obligation of a levirate marriage, unless it's substantiated that she has begun to mature physically. So let me just explain. When a father marries off his younger daughter, 9 years old, 10 years old, he can accept kesef kiddushin on the daughter's behalf. And that kiddushin is kiddushin midoraisa. That would require a get to get out of that marriage. But let's say there's no father, and the mother and the brothers decide to accept kiddushin on the girl's behalf when she's 10 years old. That kiddushin is only M'Rabanan. There's a din of miyun. Until she reaches 12 years old, she can say, I don't want to be married, and the marriage is annulled. You don't need a get. She just walks away from it. Once she's 12 years old, then the kiddushin is chal, and you can't do miyun anymore. She would need a get. Now, chlitza, we know what that is. We said Reuven and Shimon. Reuven dies, no children. Reuven's wife falls to Shimon. We don't allow yibum today because we feel that people are not doing it l'shem shemayim, so we require chlitza. But this only happens if you're an adult. Now, so why do they not have to physically check her before miyun? We assume that she's 12 years old, that she has the hair. But by chlitza, we would check her. Many achronim take the position that this chazaka is not a function of certainty, but simply a kind of uncertain probability. Therefore, in the case of miyun, where the chazaka generates astringency, because if she has two hairs, we wouldn't accept miyun. So we don't want astringency, we want a leniency. We'll say that she doesn't have two hairs until she's actually 12 years old. So she can do miyun until then. We don't say, oh, maybe she's got the simonim already. By contrast, in the case of chalitza, the chazak indicates a leniency, which might bring about permitting her to have an illicit relationship when she's still subject to levirate marriage. Unless you get chalitza, you can't marry another man. If you do without the proper chalitza, if the chalitza was given to her when she was a minor, it's not a good chalitza. And if she gets married to somebody else, there would be a prohibition. So in that case, we can't use the chazaka. Based on this approach, many authorities rule that the chazaka should be applied only regarding rabbinic laws, according to the principle of safek d'Rabbanan l'kula, right? If you have a doubt about chicken and milk, right? So that's not midaraisa, it's only d'Rabbanan. So if it's a safek, you can treat it l'kula. If something is safek milk and meat, so bas b'chol is midaraisa. You have to leave, you can't touch it. So one is lenient about uncertainties for rabbinic law, but the chazak is not operative regarding laws which are deraisa, because sof deraisa l'chumra. Regarding the application of this question to minyan, it means for us the question is, do we accept age as a chazaka that they have the hairs, and that we don't have to check every child that comes into our minyan to see if they are mitzvah to the minyan? The Beis Yosef indicates that there must be concrete knowledge that the boys developed two hairs. But he mentions that the Marik was more lenient. The Beis Yosef in his commentary on the tour, Mashma Shem Lo Yavi Shtei Saros Ein Mushel Minyan. Afilu Gadol Kamat Sheyotzu Rav Shnoisav Shezis Borshu Saris. Meaning, Rav Shnoisav is 35 years old. The majority people are assumed to live till 70. So you wait until he's 35 years old before you declare him a castrate. Because maybe at 25 he'll get hair. Once he's reached the majority of his years, he's considered a saris. He was born sort of castrate without the ability of making testosterone. Does not making him a psuadaka because nothing physically has been done to him. It's only surgical removal of the testicle to make you a psuadaka.
What happens if they give him injections of testosterone?
You're not a psuadaka. Harold asked, oh, no, I thought you said, what if you get, Harold asked if you get injections of testosterone. Well, then you're not a sorry. If you got, let's say you were diagnosed at the age of 8
Yes.
with low testosterone for whatever reason,
Oh,
and they gave them any matured normally,
that's
so
fine.
he's fine.
So, okay, so that's, you can help it along.
You can help it
Oh,
along.
okay.
You can help it along. Absolutely. Kosav Mari Kolon B'Shurt Memtes Masha Kosav B'Sefer Machkim D'Sugidam Lo Avdikach Haina Lasrich Shtei Cyrus Mikol Mokom Tzarich Lios Ben Yom Yul Shon Levrei Hamachkim. You can rely on just being 13 years old. Uposkim Achronim K'mar Rosh Uvno Rav Yaakov Betur Ar Chayim. Rav Yosef Kalon the Marik wrote that the minig is not to insist on 2 hairs, but he has to be 13, period. The Shulchan Aruch, when he brings the halacha, maintains the more stringent position, but the Ramah accepts the more lenient view, according to which age is a sufficient indicator that the child is mature physically. So if you're ever asked, can we rely, when a child comes into the minyan, do we have to check him? Do we not have to check him? And if you're asked, what's the din? You say it's machlokas, the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah. The Shulchan Aruch requires him to be checked. The Ramah, that the Ashkenazim follow, you don't have to check him. If he's 13, it's enough. Im lohevi stay Cyrus, afilu gadol b'shanim. If he's 14 years old, but he still doesn't have any hair, dino kikotten. Until he's 35. The Ramah says we don't check. We rely on chazaka, kigadol. We say most likely he has 2 hairs. The Mishnah Berurah explains that the position of the Ramah is based upon the chazaka that 2 hairs are indeed present, which came from this approach of Rava. But it's only relevant to rabbinic halacha. The dinim of minyan is rabbinic. Whatever. Kaddish is rabbinic. Davening is rabbinic. Kaddish is rabbinic. Kedusha is rabbinic. Baruch Hu is rabbinic. Kriyas HaTorah is rabbinic. Mishnah Berurah. Ritzolam alinyan tefillah. Shehi M'Rabanan. You only need, you can rely on the chazaka. Now, vafilu das hapoiskin de tefillah deraisa. We're going to see when we learn the dinim of Shmona Esrei that there's a machlokes. We paskin that Shmona Esrei is drabanan, but there will be poskin that says midaraisa. Al kolpanim tzir faser lav deraisa. But the concept of minyan to create tefillah b'tzibor, that is not deraisa. Al ken samchin al zeh. So we rely on his age. We don't have to take him to the bathroom and check him. The Rav Anoshim Mekivan Shigula Klashonim Mistamim Mivin Beis Tyrus. Most men at the age of 13 have 2 cyrus. But for Chiyuvim Doraisa, we would not rely on the Chazaka. I am the prima Godim Shemarich Bezeh. Umesik the Mishum Milamotzi. Beautiful, Ariella. But I'm teaching right now. But let me say, can I see him? Good night, Dov Yonasan.
Okay.
Good night. Yeah, he listened. He's so alert.
Okay, Ernie.
Here,
You're not supposed to
but
answer the phone.
you look.
Oh, sorry, Daddy. Oh, call me back. Bye.
I will call you back.
He doesn't know he's going to answer the phone.
Doctor has to.
Ernie, it seems to me that there's an implication that you know that the child when he's saying that he's 13, because if you didn't, then you're really taking you're taking the possibility that the kid is, you don't know the kid, you're taking his word for it. So isn't there an implication that you have to know the roots of the child?
You raise a good point. You were talking about something called edus, right?
Right.
You rely on the testimony. That's something else. Let's say he brought a birth certificate and he shows us that he's 13. Meaning, we usually don't. The person tells us he's 13.
I mean, if he's a family that you knew, grew up, obviously you know the child. But if he's someone that happened, you can't. In other words, can you pull someone off the street and he says, "Oh yeah, I'm 13." Is that allowed?
Is he Jewish?
Of course.
No, he has cheskes kashrus. And it's like someone comes in and says he's a Kohen. You don't have to prove he doesn't have to prove he's a Kohen. Even if you don't know him.
But it seems like the
doesn't have
implication, here is that there should be some sort of proof.
No, no. What we said is regarding the checking for the 2 hairs. If he's 13, the chazak is he has the 2 hairs. We don't have to check him. It's only rabbinic. There's no purpose.
Right. So if he is 13, therefore you're saying that you do take the child's word for it. Is that what you're saying?
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's a different analysis. It has to do with the meanings, like Yaakov said, we do rely, Eid Echad is Neman B'Surim,
Sorry, we believe that you're a Kohen also. It's okay. Don't worry.
Somebody says something is kosher. If he's a kosher Jew, we believe him. So if he's 13, he says that he's 13, we would believe him. I don't see.
Even though he might not even be
If
13.
it's midoraisa, we would not. We would require proof.
He has proof. He has proof. He says, I had a bar mitzvah party.
No, but I'm saying you're right. But I'm saying if he
I
pulls him off
think-
the street, he may
No,
not
but
be. He
Yaakov-
may not be 13.
Yaakov Goldfinger, if it came to chlitz or yibum, they would probably ask for his birth certificate.
Would ask for the Cyrus. Never mind.
You need both though, Walter. You need both. You need 13 and Beis Cyrus. If you're 12 and a half and have Beis Cyrus, you wouldn't be able to do yibum chlitza.
No, before a minyan.
Both.
But with the minyan, the Abana, we said.
So by minyan, no, Sai Litwin was asking, why do we believe the kid when he says that he's 13? He's asking a different issue. Like somebody said, I'm a Kohen. We believe him. That's a different analysis. That's laws regarding edus and whether we believe when somebody says something and when do we not. Hapesha asr, hapesha hitir, hapesha asr. There's a lot of ramifications regarding that. I think it's a very good question, but they're not talking about that here. They're talking about if it's Doraisa, he's going to need to be checked, even if we know he's 13 for 2 hairs. When we're talking about rabbinic minyan, we don't have to check him. He tells us he's 13 and we believe that he's 13, that's enough. Now, the Prima Godim said, miyuda motzui. It's something that happens occasionally, but it happens. So that happens here too, that you might have a 13-year-old without Cyrus. For example, examining the lung of the slaughtered animal is also a miyuda motzui. Doesn't happen very often, but it happens. So that's why you have to check the lung. We don't rely on the chazaka that the majority of lungs don't have a hole in it when it comes to a deraisa dikadin. So in light of this prima godim, even we say that Rav's chazaka is based upon a majority, nonetheless Chazal were strict about deraisa laws, that there is concern for the somewhat common minority of 13-year-old boys who have not yet developed 2 hairs. What's the halachic conclusion today? The Piskei Teshuvos notes that the simplest understanding of the Shulchan Aruch is that a person can be counted for the minyan only when it is certain that he has passed the threshold of physical maturation. Nevertheless, he writes that the common practice of both Ashkenazim and Sfardim is to follow the Ramah on this issue. Accordingly, we may be lenient regarding the issue of counting for a minyan and rely upon Rav's chazaka that age is a reliable indicator. The Piskei Teshuvos says, Kishanasa Yud Gimel Shana, once he's 13, Vafilu Imein Yadua, it may be baby. We don't know for sure if he has 2 hairs. Kaimelon lalacha kedivrei Ramah shadino kegadol. The practical halacha today is like the Ramah, that we treat him as an adult. The Af Asfardim Noagim came. Even the Sfardim who normally follow the Shulchan Aruch follow the Ramah here. Ve'afilu bat kuviyadu vaday shloivi beis tyrus. Listen to this. Let's say they checked him, and he doesn't have 2 hairs. We are concerned that he had them and they fell off. Aval lo doraisa, but not for doraisa dekadins. Now, you don't know for sure. Maybe size case. It's a double suffix. Because the filu cotton yesh material mitzraf. Remember, we had many poskim that said you can even mitzraf the cotton. So if it's a cotton, they might work as well. Bim suffix b'shanim achvar gila klas simoni. So that answers size question. Even if there's a suffix, we have a sfeik, a double suffix, because that Even if he's a cotton, we can rely on the Ramah that said you can rely on a cotton.
No, I don't think that's the same case. I think what we're talking about here is, let's say the cotton says, I don't know from 13. And that isn't necessarily the same case. It's not where he says, and you don't know whether to rely on him. It's that he just doesn't know.
I would say, I certainly agree in that case. But I'm saying, let's say we don't know.
Well, but I don't.
No, I'm
is the
saying, let's
point?
say he says I'm 13, but you're misupik if he's 13, which is the
Just
issue that
because-
I raised. We don't know. So it's the same sveka.
Well, but Mesupik can be two things. It could be we have a reason to distrust him, or in general, we don't accept him. I don't think that that's what we're talking about, where we just don't accept someone who says they're 13. I think it's Mesupik means there's some basis. Either he doesn't know, he says he doesn't know, or we have some external reason to doubt his veracity. So otherwise, I still go back to Cheskas Kashrus, which is common. We actually even accept it in the Doraisa, but we need to go that far now.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, so if you're saying if the child tells us, I don't know how old I am, I'm not sure.
Right.
I'm not sure that's. I think I'm bar mitzvah. Maybe he said, I think I'm bar mitzvah. Yeah. I think I'm a bar mitzvah.
Right, or we know he's a liar, and we have a reason to distrust him because we know he's lied in other cases. I mean, I'm saying it's not the normal case where someone comes in that I think we have to doubt, or at least it's not evident from what we've learned that you have to doubt someone who says I'm bar mitzvah. I think either he doesn't know, or there's some other external basis that we have to doubt his veracity.
Well, we had a case like this after the Holocaust.
Right.
Children that survived the camps, and the parents didn't. They didn't know what their birthday was.
Okay, so that's a suffix, a suffix in Metzias, regarding he doesn't know how old he is. So the Yeshlit saying, Kinaktinin lamaisa shemiyad shemolulo yud gimel shona dino kagaru. Once he reaches 13, he's like a gadol. Uchachras rov gdolei aposkim. Lo nagina lachmir kasoivim la'antim atsheh ben yud gimel shona shleimim eis leis mishash shenoilad. Our practice is not to wait to the time he was born. Let's say he was born noontime, so he's not a gadol until noontime. He says no. He's a gadol right away. The noila b'bein hashmoshos, like we said, yesh linkot l'churma l'chayva b'nachas tefillin chol mitzvahs b'yom hakoydim. You have to push the mitzvahs tefillin to the next day. V'efshar gam l'tzar for l'minyan. Kivin shetzir fasol l'dvar shebekdush avim M'Rabanan. V'rak l'ninot tzachar midei chavos shem l'doraisa yesh lachmir. To be a bar chiyuv, to be moitzi other people, and he was born ben hashmoshos, so we wait until for sure he's a bar mitzvah. And Rav Mordechai Eliyahu writes that the minhag is to be lenient. Let's just see the footnote. This issue is relevant in the case of celebrating a bar mitzvah on the day of one's 13th birthday. According to the Mishnah Berurah and the Piskei Tshuva, who hold that one is considered 13 from the beginning of the day, the bar mitzvah may always be celebrated on that day, regardless of what time the boy was born. Except if, for example, Parsha Zachar, which many hold is a Doraisa. So then it might come in that if the bar mitzvah boy was born 3 o'clock in the afternoon, he can't read Parsha Zachar in the morning because it's Doraisa. So we rely on the Chorma Dikashitas that we have to wait until he's Me'es La'es, until the time that he was Mamish born. Says the Maimer Mordechai Eliyahu, Yesh Mishom Shekod Nafilu Mikvar Yigia Yud Gimel Shrav Yom Echad, Im Lo Eviste Cyrus Lo Mitzraf L'Minyan. There was those that said that even if he's 13, but he doesn't have 2 hairs, he's not mitzvah. Because we need 2 conditions. Shiyeh ben Yud Gimel, v'shiyeh v'shtei Cyrus. V'yeh shoimrim, she'megia l'gil Yud Gimel v'yom echad, muchzak. He's a chazaka, k'mo she'eh v'shtei Cyrus, mitzvah l'minyan v'chei noagim. So he sort of solidifies this halacha that we've been saying is accepted by both the Sfardim and the Ashkenazim that we don't really check. What if, can you count somebody who's sleeping for a minyan? The Shulchan Aruch rules that a sleeping person may be counted for the minyan. Oshu Yoshan, he's davening b'echidus, or he's sleeping. You can count them in the minyan. However, there seems to be a Shulchan Aruch in Kuf Chav Daled, which seems to go against this. When the Chazan is repeating the Amida, if there are 9 people, if there are only 9 people, if there aren't 9 people listening to him, Karav lios berchosav levatala. It's like the brachos of levatala. Lachin koladim yasat smokilo ein tezulaso. Everyone should see himself as if there is no 9 without him. V'chavin lebirchas hachazan. Well, that seems to imply that if it was a sleeping person there who wasn't answering, it would not count for the minyan. So it emerges if 10 people are not answering to the birchas of the chazan, the brachos are recited in vain. So why did he write in Nun Hey that a sleeping person is counted? So a number of answers have been suggested. One is offered by the Drisha. The Drisha and the Prisha are commentaries on the Tur as well, who writes that the latter position reflects the ideal situation, while the former is more lenient because it discusses Shas Atchak, extenuating circumstances. This is why the Shulchan Aruch describes the problem as one in which the brachos are virtually in vain. It didn't say they are levatala. They said they're karov levatala. Says the Drisha. Cause of Beis Yosef, right? The Beis Yosef is the commentary on the Tur, and the Prisha is right there as well. Cause of karov v'lo mamish. It's not mamish levatala. Kichvar cause of le'el. He already wrote in Reish Siman Nun Hey, Dim Hiskil Basara, Afilu Yotzu Ktsason. If you started with 10, even some went out, Hashliach Tzibur Goymer. The Chazan can finish. You got in his board Beis Yosef, Afilu Ktsas Yishenim, or Mesaprin, Shmuos. Some are sleeping, some are talking. Afilu Hashliach Tzibur Mispal of a Goymer Tfilosa. The Mogen Avram, citing the Mariel, writes that the latter halacha is actually rejected, and the law is in accordance with the earlier ruling, such that a sleeping person may be counted. Because of Mariel, because of Arosh to be in Shichavnu Tishel Brichos Hashatz, even though the Rosh said we need to have 9 people having kavana to the brachos of the Chazan, Lo Nagin Kachi. Someone who's talking, someone's not listening, obviously. He's still mitzaref. So even a sleeping person is counted in the minyan. In the Shulchan Aruch Harav, Rav Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, distinguishes between the recitations of Kaddish and Baruch Hu and that of the repetition of the Shliach Tzibur. According to him, it's possible to rely upon 6, the majority of the minyan, to recite a Davar Shebigdusha during Arvis, or Kaddish, or Baruch Hu, in Shachris, even if the other participants are still praying the Amidah. But in Shachris or Mincha, in which there is a repetition, we insist on 9 people who may answer the Shliach Tzibur during the repetition. Kol Shanishar Arav Shonin Amen. As long as the majority of 10 are answering Amen, Ein Aniyas Samiyut Me'akeves. The fact it's not Ma'akev. Shein Amir Stavar Shebigdusha B'Yud Toli B'Niyos. Saying Baruch Hu or something B'Kedusha is not totally in them responding. Rak She'yusham. They need to be physically present. Shenemar V'Nigdashti B'Soch B'nei Yisrael. Al Kol Asar She'en B'nei Kedusha Shechina Shor Aleim. So Baruch Hu, Kaddish, these are things that you don't need the full 10 to answer. That's why if, let's say, somebody after Ma'ariv is the Chazan, and he looks around, he says there's 10 people, 4 are still davening Shmona Esrei, he's allowed to say the Kaddish after the Shemon Esrei. As long as you have 6 people answering, that's enough. However, you need 9 people answering by the Shemon Esrei, according to the Balatanya. So that's these are important halachas for us when we daven, sometimes with just 10 people.
Yeah, but that's a Hasidic at Balatanya. It's what he doesn't paskin. Do we paskin like that?
Well, yeah, because we said, the Mogen Avram said that the Maril said you need 9 people to pay attention. But if the Mogen Avram said, even if somebody's talking, he's counted. So that means even if he's sleeping, that a sleeping person can be counted. And therefore, you don't need a full 9 to answer, even by the Shliach Tzibur. So it seems like the Mogen Avram is being even more lenient than the Balatanya. The Balatanya is saying, that din of not requiring 9 to answer is by Kaddish Baruch Hu, but Shemon Esrei, you need 9. Mogen Avram might be more lenient than that. And then remember, this is dealing with the laws of sleeping. And we touched upon the laws of how much minyan do you need. So I think we will deal with this more in depth when we do Shemon Esrei by itself and Shots by itself in volume 11. But we see here, there seems to be a different Mogen Avram and the Balatanya regarding this issue. A more difficult issue. Can you count a Jew who does not keep mitzvos in the minyan? Is there an immutable principle according to which every adult Jewish male may count for a minyan? Or are there certain circumstances under which a person may become disqualified? And this is debated by the Rishonim. The Beis Yosef cites the Sefer Amanig that a choteh, a sinner, counts for a minyan. The one who's put into cherem from the community does not count. Kosev b'Sefer Amanig, Adam shu avaryan, a man that is a sinner, lo niduhu akol, but the community did not put him in the cherem, me'atzlam, from them, nimne leminyan asor, he's counted to the minyan, v'chai b'chol hamitzvos. Tichsiv ba'achan, Achan was moyel behegdish, because when they captured the city of Ai, Yoshua warned them, nobody's to benefit from the city. But Achan benefited. So it said, Chata Yisrael. From here we learn the famous drasha, Afal Pisha Chata Yisrael. He's a sinner, but he remains a Jew. The Bikdush Koi. He remains in his kedusha as a Jew. V'lo yotze b'klal Yisrael. Aval nidu me'etzlam. Baruch Spinoza was excommunicated from the community in Amsterdam. So he was put in the cherem. Eino mitzraf l'asara. V'lo l'chol davar shebekdusha. She'im mitztaref, ma mo'ilu b'takanotim shevdilu magdosam. If you count him for a minyan, then what? It's a joke on the Chachamim that they put him into cherem. What act will them putting into cherem do if you count them for the minyan? Kain kosav Rashi, ad kan l'shoinai. V'chein kosav b'ferish l'Rabbeinu Meir mi-Rottenburg, right? Who lived in Worms, and Rashi attended the yeshiva in Worms. Shavayin shavar l'gzeres hatzibur. That a sinner, if they didn't put in the cherem, can be counted. Uvetshuva acheres cause of v'zel shono. Ma shekotav t'shatan ninam elispala matzibur ba'oda isha hu shemal b'cherem v'es hakneses. Somebody asked a shaila. that somebody stole money from the shul, and they're counting him, or that you don't daven in the minyan with that person. He nezos chumra yitzera. Shelo kiblo lemakol. Elo shelo yitztarf basoro. Shelo yitzpalu imo toch arba amoisov. The Kal may have said, you have to stay away 4 amas from him, or they wouldn't pray with him. The Marami Rotenberg says this is not prohibited by the Gemara, and it seems like the Rav Rotenberg is also saying that he can be counted in a minyan. In light of
So
these,
if somebody is putting cherem, he doesn't want to give a get.
but let's see if we deal with that, because in our day, that seems to be the only time that the community puts somebody in cherem. I would think it's the same thing. If you put somebody in cherem, so you have certain dinim. One of them is you don't count them in a minyan. In light of these sources, it is clear that the sin itself is not a reason to restrict a person's counting for minyan. It's because a Jew who sins is considered Yisrael, and he's automatically included in the verse, I will be sanctified among the children of Israel, which is source for the principles of tefillah with the minyan. It would appear that even if the person is excommunicated on the social plane, he is prevented from joining the count of the minyan, not by the strict terms of the excommunication, but simply to reinforce the basic terms of his social restriction. That means somebody put into cherem, like Rav Yaakov Goldenberg said, because he's not giving a get, maybe Medina, you can count him in a minyan, but we keep him out of it because otherwise there's no social restriction by putting into cherem. The Shulchan Aruch rules accordingly that only cherem prevents a person from being counted for the minyan, but chet alone does not have that effect. A variant she'over agzer satzibur, or she'over averim lo nidu nimne leminyan asara. As long as the community didn't put him in the cherem, he's counted. But menuda, somebody put into cherem, you don't count them for 10. He's allowed to daven there. Unless they said as part of the cherem, you're not allowed to come into the shul. But what the Shulchan Aruch is saying here is you don't count him for the minyan, but he's allowed to come to shul and daven. Rav Yosef Kar reconfirms every man's eligibility to be counted the minyan because of the principle, although he has sinned, he remains a Jew. Comes the Mishnah Berurah, quoting the Pri Megadim, who understands that this approach indicates an inherent stringency. If a person commits a sin that compromises his identity as a Jew, such as the public desecration of Shabbos, then the person forfeits his ability to be counted for the minyan. See Chulin 5a, which states that one who desecrates Shabbos or worship idols has the halachic status of a non-Jew. Says the Mishnah Berurah, O she'over avera, cause of Pri Megadim, dafka avera she'over l'te'ovam. When do we include a sinner in a minyan? When he's committing sins out of desire. He eats a McDonald's hamburger. He commits some kind of sexual immorality out of desire. And then he becomes a Baal Tshuva, even if he's not a Baal Tshuva. Somebody who sins out of lust or desire, that's a sinner who remains a Yisrael. But somebody sins lahachis. Oh, I don't like Judaism. I don't believe in this. To make Hashem angry. Afilu b'davar echad. So even if a person just does one sin, he's known to worship idols, or he's known to publicly desecrate Shabbos. Dino ka'akum ve'eno mitzdaref. Now, gentlemen, we're familiar with this. If you remember, we learned by Pasakum, we learned by Pas Yisrael, we learned by Yayin Nesech, by Kashrus. Remember that if a Jew is not religious on this madrega,
Yeah.
so he was considered like an akum.
Mhm.
If he touches pas, if he touches
Right.
wine, all that. So this shouldn't surprise us. We went through all of this in detail then, and we made a distinction there as well. What kind of a variant should a person be? So apparently when you desecrate Shabbos publicly,
Mhm.
it's a chilul Hashem, and you're violating Shabbos lachis, and therefore you're considered like an akum.
Ernie, Moshe is saying, if I'm not mistaken, that even if you are mechalel Shabbos befaresia, if you do it because of parnose, and it's clear that you need the parnose, then you can mitzaref it.
So we're gonna have the Igros Moshe coming up. Very good.
Okay, I don't have the sefer, sorry.
Do you need volume 10, David?
Yes, but
I have a
Okay.
volume 10 for you. I thought
Okay,
I brought
sir.
it for you.
So I will stop by.
Okay. Okay, so David raises a nice Igros Moshe, which we're gonna learn. Now, afilu aver shechayv alem misa means a person does a favor that you would kill him for. As long as the Beis Din didn't put him into cherem, he can be counted for a minion. Batam dechsiv ba'achon chati Yisrael avu b'shechati Yisrael hu v'kdusha sekei v'kata nikra karoim. Now, the Karaites ain't mitzarfin lasara she'ainim moedim b'tor shebal peh. If they're like stukim, v'chol mishu koifer b'tor shebal peh mitzarfin chol davar shebekdusha.
So how do conservative reform rabbis fit in?
So Harold asked, the conservative reform movement don't believe in Torah Shabbal Peh, or maybe they do, but not fully. So they would have a problem to be mitzraf l'minyan. Now the comments of the Pri Megadim raise a very practical challenge for the contemporary landscape. What is the status of those Jews who do not observe Torah mitzvahs? Is it still the case today that Jews cannot be counted for a minyan if they do not observe Shabbos? This question has been addressed by a number of leading authorities in recent generations. According to the Yalkut Yosef, although it is possible to rely upon more lenient opinions when truly necessary, it is indeed problematic to include those who violate Shabbos publicly in the count of a minyan. Ein litzarf l'minyan misha b'chal Shabbos b'farhesya. Tigon shosam malacha shasur b'nator b'fnei asar misrael b'yachad. If he does malachos midoraisa in the presence of 10 Jews, he's a machal Shabbos b'farhesya. Uvechlal ze misha noid b'mechonit b'Shabbos b'shus harabim. Somebody who drives his car in the public domain. V'yesh mekilim b'zeh b'shas adchak. Some are makel if you need a minyan. Ubeprat b'tfilas arvish ein ba chazara. And specifically in Ma'ariv, where there's no shliach tzibur who repeats a Shemon Esrei. Ve'amakilim b'zeh b'shas adchak yesh lam al mashi yismochu. He says people who are lenient, there's something to rely on. Mikol makom, im ha'omrim kaddish she'em b'cheskos b'chalei Shabbos b'farhesya, v'adei shetzarech ha'shliach tzibur Yisrael kosher acher loymar imayam ha'kaddish. He says, if there's somebody there saying Kaddish, and he's the only one, and he starts saying Kaddish and nobody else there, either the Shatz or another kosher person should recite the Kaddish with him, so that the tzibur will fulfill their obligation of Amira Kaddish.
What about giving aliyah to somebody like that?
Okay, so we're going to have Dinei Kriyas HaTorah coming. I would rather leave. There's going to be a whole analysis the same way we analyzed this by Pasakum and by Gvina Sakum and by Yayin Nesech. We discussed the non-religious Jew. We're going to discuss the non-religious Jew by Elias as well.
So Ernie, we've seen that in the small Chabad shuls where there's barely a minyan and they rely on people or they want to be starve people who are not completely Shomer Shabbos, that the Rav will say Kaddish, especially if that individual wants to say Kaddish, the Rav says Kaddish alongside him, in addition to him.
We just read that halacha. Rav Ovadia just said, if there's only one person saying Kaddish and we know that he's a Mechalel Shabbos, the Farhesia, then either the Chazan should say along with him or somebody in the community should say along with him.
So now I
Absolutely.
understand what you're saying.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I want to read the footnote here. Rav Ovadia assumes a more lenient stance regarding people who violate Shabbos. For instance, regarding Birchas Kohanim, when the Kohen violates Shabbos. See the Abiyah Omer there. Perhaps Rav Ovadia is stringent specifically regarding counting someone for a minyan, based on an idea similar to that of Rav Soloveitchik, discussed in the Machshava section at the end of this year. In his opinion, the nuclear unit of a minyan has great symbolic significance as representatives of the entire Jewish people for the purposes of witnessing the sanctification of Hashem's name. If so, with regards to constituting the minyan, there may be room to insist on a standard of mitzvah observance which reflects the lofty mission of being an accessory to the sanctification of Hashem's name, even when failure to meet this mitzvah standard is not a conscious act of rebellion. So, and we'll see this issue of Rav Soloveitchik regarding Tefillah B'tzibur is a whole different kiyum mitzvah when the shot says the Shemon Esrei than when we say it as a yachid, and that's something we'll learn later on.
I tell you, in South Africa, there was I don't want to say anything, but basically there were parking lots in all the Orthodox shuls because every shul was Orthodox. And basically, I'm not convinced that they were going according to this halacha because people said Kaddish there. I'm not sure if people said Kaddish with them. Maybe in Chabad they do. I don't think in Chabad they did either. We saw the Shabbos Bernie. There was one guy saying Kaddish. The rabbi didn't say Kaddish with him. So I'm not convinced on all these things.
Well, we haven't. Let's finish. Let's read the Igros Moshe. We're going to stop here, but so we're going to finish this sugya of the person who is not shomer mitzvahs. Where does he fit in, and what is this? What is the normative halacha today? We're still in the midst of it. We're leaving you hanging like perils of Pauline. Okay. Okay. Have a good
Lucky and
Shabbos,
lucky.
everybody.
Good night.
Okay.
Good week.